Good afternoon, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm carrying on with my series on the Northern Ireland Troubles. I was looking at the 1994 ceasefire. So the IRA had declared ceasefire, so had the UDA and UVF. The INLA was still provoking the conflict. Now, the Drumcree dispute was at its height at this time. Talking about 95, Trimble won the leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party, partly because of his fulsome support for the Orangemen at Garvaghy Road, demanding the right to march down this road, despite the fact that most of the residents did not want them going there. Anyway, so the UVF was very amenable to negotiations. They had their own political party, the Progressive Unionist Party, and David Irvine was its leader for a while. However, some members of the UVF, particularly in mid-Ulster, were very dissatisfied with negotiations, felt it could only come at the expense of the Loyalist position, and they were irate about the Garvaghy Road situation because the government was trying to prevent marches down there. So some UVF people split off and they formed the Loyalist Volunteer Force, headed by Billy Wright, known as King Rat. So he was born in Wolverhampton, England, to a Northern Irish family. He'd returned to Ulster when he was little, and he'd had Catholic friends, apparently played Gaelic football when he was little, but in the 70s some of his family had been killed by the IRA, and he became ferociously anti-Catholic. He was puritanical in some ways, didn't drink or smoke, but and he said that his country mattered more to him than his religion, and he realised he might be going to hell for the sins he'd committed. So his organisation was particularly vicious. Just as the UVF were moving away from their previous crimes, he was getting deeper into them. Indeed, the combined Loyalist military command had issued a statement, abject in true remorse for all those they'd hurt. That was read out by Gusty Spence. Gusty Spence was obviously an absolute swine who'd killed civilians who had no connection to the IRA way back in 1966, who'd done more than anybody else to spark off the conflict. But even he was expressing some penitence. But Wright was not. So the UVF were furious that the LVF was breaking the ceasefire, possibly provoking more action by the IRA. So the UVF gave a death threat to Billy Wright, said he had 24 hours to leave Northern Ireland, and he didn't do that. He was there at a rally at Portadown as the deadline to leave expired. And incidentally, this is the kind of thing the government turned a blind eye to. Loyalists threatened to kill other loyalists, or Republicans killing other Republicans, or indeed people within the Catholic community, or loyalists killing people within the Protestant community. That was considered house cleaning, just so long as people didn't attack the security forces or members of the other religious denomination. So a taxi driver around Drumcree, Michael McGoldrick, was murdered by the LVF for no other reason than his religious denomination. And in these protests about the Garvaghy Road dispute, the Reverend Willie McRae, MP, shared a platform with Billy Wright. So McRae was in the DUP, and Billy Wright was a notorious loyalist terrorist who was among the worst of the worst, who was insisted on the path of violence when other people in his movement had turned away from it. So anyway, that march had been going on every year since 1807, hadn't been disputed till the 1980s. And the Garvaghy Road Residents Association, they pointed out that one of the Orange Lodges, Boyne Island Heroes, had a banner in honour of Robert Bates, who was one of the Shankill Butchers, particularly sadistic group of UVF brutes who'd kidnapped and tortured people in the 70s simply because they were Catholics who were not connected to the INLA or IRA in any sense. So the Reverend Paisley was protesting there, and he said this right to march down the road was the difference between freedom and slavery, between Ulster and an Irish Republic, which was obviously ludicrous, but typical of his demagoguery. Now, the Republic of Ireland can in no sense be called tyrannical, and there's no slavery there, nor ever has been. Anyway, in 95, the government forced the way through for the Orangemen. It was to come back to the same thing in 96. A parades commission was set to adjudicate these things. So both sides would riot if they didn't get their way. So Loyalists often said that they wanted to be part of the UK because of their British way of life. And for them, often these Loyal Order marches were vital to that. But this obviously seemed ridiculous to many people in Great Britain because the Loyal Orders are a much bigger factor in Northern Ireland than they are in Great Britain. So at that time, about 20% of Protestant men would be members of one of the loyal orders, whereas in Great Britain would it even be 1%? So anyway, the loyal orders are often accused of being anti-Catholic. There's a statement called the qualifications of an Orangeman, and one of them is to desist from any uncharitable references to our Roman Catholic brethren. But the loyal orders, they didn't help themselves by using antiquated terminology such as the Queen's Highway rather than the road, or calling each other brethren, things like that. Saying Her Majesty's government, which people don't do very often. I do it occasionally, just for the sake of variety. So they were not moving with the times, and they were seen as deeply distasteful, certainly by left-wingers in Great Britain. Anyway, so progress was not being made so far as the provisional IRA was concerned, and some people like Joe Cole were deeply worried about it, felt it was unsatisfactory, and it would allow the Crown forces to continue spying on them. Incidentally, the IRA, they kept up intelligence gathering through 94, 95, just in case the conflict was going to restart. Punishment beatings went on as things were going on before the Troubles. The RUC was trying to build bridges and meet members of the Catholic community more, including working class people who tended to be more ardently nationalist. Of course, there were Catholics in the RUC, but not a huge number. And Republicans found this quite threatening, that more people in the Catholic community might see the RUC as an acceptable police force. One of my friends who grew up in Fermanagh, she told me, as a Catholic growing up in the north, you're taught to just ignore the RUC. And obviously some people were a bit more hostile than simply ignoring the RUC. So vigilantism continued. Anyway, about this time in 96, that's it, yeah, the IRA launched a bank robbery in the Republic of Ireland in Adair. They shot dead Garda Jerry McCabe. A few IRA men were convicted of murder, and the IRA and Sinn Féin would not denounce this crime. Martin Ferris's daughter, she's a politician in Kerry, and she would not speak out against it, even when asked years later, was that the wrong thing to do? And she thought that robbing a bank was entirely permissible because it was committing one crime in order to commit many more to finance that campaign. So, yeah, the RUC was less unpopular amongst the Catholic community than it had been. This family I know from South Down, I shan't say where, that they had their car bumped into around this time, and they went to the RUC about it, and they were able to test the paint and find actually who damaged their car. Was for some people that would have been unacceptable, and Republicans didn't like that, people treating the RUC as a ordinary police force. So things were getting jittery, and when was it? In 96, February 96, the Provisional IRA felt they had not been given enough concessions. So they broke their own ceasefire. They phoned a television station minutes before they set off a bomb in London, and that was it. The conflict was back on. So the IRA was killing again, but not very effectively. So Lance Bombardier Stephen Resterick was shot dead in February 96 by a single bullet. He was the last soldier to be killed in Northern Ireland. There's a memorial to him in Peterborough, which is where he came from. So the Drumcree dispute came to a head yet again in July 1996. There are a lot of people of moderate opinion who would get out of Northern Ireland for the marching season. It's just about the time the school holidays begin and go anywhere else. And I remember meeting this Protestant family in the south in the summer, and they didn't actually say they were Unionists. Maybe they weren't. They might have been in the supporters of the Alliance Party. They might have been neutral, and they were the sort of reasonable people who gave my father hope, someone who's of quite nationalist opinions. So it's an unsafe assumption simply to say because somebody is a Protestant, they're a Unionist, or they're a Catholic, they're a nationalist. Some people were more agnostic about this. One of my friends at university is from the north. He was a Protestant, and his family were nominally Unionist. He said, well, it looks like we're going to join the Republic of Ireland, might as well get on with it. It didn't have a strong feeling either way, and I suppose it's a healthy thing. In situations when people who are apolitical suddenly have outspoken political opinions, it becomes a little bit worrying. Some level of apathy or indifference is probably a healthy thing. In the early 70s, almost everybody seemed to have a very strong opinion on Northern Ireland's future. Tony Blair was leader of the opposition at this time. He'd been elected in 1994 to head the Labour Party. And he went to Northern Ireland, gave a speech to a Unionist audience and said, more or less, I'm one of you. My mother's an Ulster Protestant, though she's from Donegal, and so on. If United Ireland were ever to come, it wouldn't be in the lifetime of anybody who's in this room right now. And that was reassuring to people there. Anyway, so and the IRA was not very successful. They'd shot dead 2 RUC officers in June 1997, and their sniper, Goldfinger, he was arrested, and all his team shortly before that. They were caught red-handed with the weapon, but the soldiers didn't kill them, which they easily could have done. You know, there you've got a gun, so you're a threat to us. So the British Army strategy was not to kill people, but to try and prevent deaths as much as possible. So May 1997, the Conservative government had been swept out of office. Labour won by a landslide, and they were somewhat more sympathetic to the nationalist position. And the following month, Fianna Fáil, they were ushered into office in the Republic of Ireland. So it was a clean slate. And the next month, July 1997, the Provisional IRA declared a ceasefire again.